Okay, so what I'm going to cover in this tutorial is families. We're going to cover the very basic steps to create a family. Then there'll be a second tutorial where we go in and deal with a little bit more of a complicated family. And so in this one, we're going to do a table. Let me go ahead and share that table. Now, families, if you remember, um, those are pre-made objects, so components, right? We go in and let's say we wanted to add a kitchen cabinet, we'd go into components and then we would go and find the cabinet that we want. And if we didn't find it, then we would go hit that button that says load family. Okay. So again, families are pre-made objects, and oftentimes they come with parameters, adjustable parameters, where we could adjust the width and the height, the length, all of that stuff. Okay. Now, what happens if Revit doesn't have the family that we want? What if we want to make our own family, our own dining table, our own chairs, seats, things like that? We can do that using by creating our own families. And so that's what we're going to do. And so we're going to start off with this table, fairly simple, straightforward table, so that we understand how families are created. Okay. Now, if you are familiar with any other 3D modeling softwares, it's not going to be the same process. Just like everything else in Revit, it has its own process and its way of doing things. Ideally, we would like to just model out a tabletop, use kind of an extrusion tool, and a 3D tool and a 3D extrusion and the tabletop. Then create a circle and extrude that, and we'd be set. Unfortunately, it doesn't work that way with Revit. Okay. In Revit, we actually build what we call kind of the scaffolding using reference planes. Okay. So we actually build these green lines. These are known as reference planes. So the process is build the scaffolding, use the reference planes first, set the dimensions that you want, create your parameters, which is the parameters are gives you that flexibility to adjust the length, the width, all that. So those are parameters. So after the dimensions, we set the parameters. And once we have everything set up, then we'll go ahead and create the actual geometry. And we lock the geometry to the reference planes. It's a very complicated process, but that's Revit. However, once we have all that set in place, then we can essentially drag and drop this into any project at any point and create this flexible or have this flexible table that we could adjust to whatever size we want. Okay, so let's go ahead and get started. I'm going to open up Revit, and instead of creating and opening up a model, we're going to come down here to families. So under families, I'm going to select new. Now, Revit makes it a little bit easy for us because it already comes in with pre-built template files for families. So it's just asking, well, what do you want to actually build? And you can see there's all sorts of things that we could build. Now, there's nothing built in these files, but it already has kind of preset settings provided for us. So it's when you're going to create a family, it's a matter of coming down and trying to see, well, what is the best, which describes the thing I'm trying to create. And so the closest thing that we would want here for a table would be furniture. So I'm going to click on furniture. I'm going to hit open. Now it's very important that the very first thing you do is save the file, because if I start working on here, then I'm essentially working in that template file, and whatever work I create in here is going to save onto that template file. And then in the future, when I want to use furniture template, it's already going to have things inside. So I'm going to go to File, Save As, and you'll notice that it does not allow me to save it as a project. I have to save it as a family. So I'll click Family. Let's just go to the desktop, and let's call this Table. I'll hit Save. Okay. Now, the next thing that I'm going to do is hit WT on the keyboard. You'll notice right up here, we have the right side view. We have the view one, which is 3D. Then we have front and then reference level, but they're all in separate tabs. If I hit WT on the keyboard, it's going to tile my windows so that I essentially have a top front right side view with a 3D view over here. Let me zoom out a little bit. Oops. What I want to do is just kind of make sure that my reference planes are all kind of centered within my window. I don't have anything in the 3D view because I haven't built anything yet. Okay. Now, these reference planes, these green lines that you see here, are our reference planes. They are invisible in the sense that they do not show up when we add the objects or when we're creating the objects, but they are reference lines, they're reference planes, sorry. They're three-dimensional planes that we can attach geometry to, okay? It's also a representation of where the object is going to enter, like where we're going to be placing it. So whenever we insert this family, it's going to be, the object is going to be coming in centered at these intersection points of my reference planes. Okay. So the first thing I'm going to do is create a set of reference plane to create that tabletop. Okay, so I'm going to create that tabletop first, then I'll create the legs and then the supports last. So I mentioned that the process is you create your reference planes first, you dimension them, then you create your parameters, and then you create the actual form. So we're going to go with step one, which is create our reference planes. I'm going to go over here to the create tab, all the way to the right, and I'm going to use reference plane. There is a reference line. The difference is the reference plane is three-dimensional, so it's an actual plane that moves in your X, Y, and Z axes. The reference line is one-dimensional, so it'll only give you a reference line in that one view that you're in, okay? And since we're working on three-dimensional objects, you're almost always going to want to use reference planes. So I'm going to click on reference plane, and I'm really just going to go from one side, click another side, and essentially kind of outlining the shape of my table. So I'm done. I'll hit the escape key. I'll hit it twice. Now, one thing that you'll notice is that my reference planes, these that I created, you want to have this original default planes at the center. So I'm kind of, right now I just eyeballed everything. But I did create these sets of lines around the default reference planes. You'll also notice that I created them with these extensions, right? Or like these line work going past one another. And that's important because what we're going to be modeling is essentially from these intersection points. But our dimensions, we want to be able to have access to grab reference lines or dimension the reference line and grab them. So that's why we have these kind of extensions. It becomes trickier if we're trying to grab a reference line when there's an object above it. Okay, so it's important to make sure that these are extending past. I also like to clean them up so that they're aligned. As we get, it's a good habit to get into because as we begin to create more and more complex forms, you're going to start having a whole lot of reference planes everywhere. And so having these lined up and creating kind of a logic to these or having these organized is going to make your life a lot easier. Okay, so we have our reference planes. So step two is create our dimensions. So I'm going to create a dimension from here to there to there and pull this up. Okay. And what I'm trying to do, what I want to do here is say that I want to set these two lines equal distance to the center here. So I'm going to type in, I'm going to hit that EQ button. And then the next thing, I'll hit the escape key. I'll just go ahead and grab one reference plane, click on one, and I have my temporary dimension. Let's change that to 2 feet. So just 2, enter. Okay. And because we had set this to EQ, to equal distance, making the change to 1 is going to make the same change to the other. So then I'll go ahead and create another dimension. And this tells me the actual width so that if the EQ, if any of these change, I still have the overall width of the tabletop. I'll hit the escape key twice. And now the next step is to create the actual parameter. Okay, the parameter again is what gives us the flexibility. So it's what allows us to go in and say, hey, this table should be 5 feet wide, 8 feet wide, 6 feet wide. Okay. And so the way we do that is we have to click on the overall dimension. And at the top, there's this little tiny button right over here on top of label, the label dimension tab. I'm going to go ahead and click there and it says create parameter. Okay. Now this is a family, so I'm going to leave this set to family parameter and I'm going to name this. So let's go ahead and name this width. And then we have two options. We have a type or we have an instance. Now, hopefully you remember, you recollect to creating a door, right? Or a window. When we wanted to edit that door, we would have to click on the door and then we'd have to hit that button that says edit type. And then we get all of those other options. So by making this a type parameter, this means that I'm going to be able to edit this table once I insert it under those type settings. And it's going to make a change to all of my tables. However, if I have instance, then I will be able to make the change on the properties box on the left-hand side, okay? So I'll show you what we mean. Let's go ahead and create the width as a type parameter, and then we'll create the length as an instance parameter. And once we're done and we go into Revit, we can see the difference. So width type done, I'll hit OK. And then you'll notice that this here changes. Now the next thing is going to be to set the length. And it's going to be the same process. We'll create a dimension. The first step is we want to make sure that our reference planes are set correctly. Go ahead and just click on one. Let's make this 4 feet. Oh, see, this is why we check everything. Let's undo that. I'm going to go ahead and click on this strand of dimensions. I forgot to hit the EQ. So I'll click EQ. Now I'll go ahead and click on one reference plane and I'm going to type 4 feet. There we have that. Now I'll create another dimension. Hit the escape key twice so that I can select this dimension. And we're going to go up to create parameter. And this one we're going to go ahead and call length. I'm going to click on instance, okay, on this one. And then let's just make a mental note that the width is set as a family, as a type parameter, and the length is set as an instance parameter. Again, we're going to come back to this at the very end. I'm going to hit OK. And I'll go ahead and bring these down a little bit because they're pretty far out now at this point. Okay. All right, so we've created these parameters. We have the width and the length. Now, before the next step is going to be to create the geometry. But before we create any geometry, get into the habit to test your parameters first. Because if your parameters are wrong, then this is now the time. This is going to be the easiest time to fix it. If you go in and you create the geometry afterwards, then you're going to run into a whole lot of problems and you're probably going to have to delete that geometry. Then come back to here, readjust everything, and then build the geometry again. So save yourself that time. Let's just test the parameters. And the way we do that is by clicking on this button over here where it says family types. Okay, so I'll click here. And this process is called flexing. It has to do with flexible, or it's testing its flexibility. So you'll hear me say, or you might hear other people say, it's time, I'll go ahead and flex the object or flex the parameters. So I'm over here in family types, and you'll now see that under dimensions, I have length and width, and they match these parameters or these dimensions here. So I'm going to set this to say 6 feet, and I'm going to change this to 3 feet, and I'm going to hit apply and OK, and then let's come and take a look. Did everything change? Did it change correctly? Are these still equal distance? Is this actually 3 feet? Are they lined up to these references? Is the dimension lining up correctly? correctly to the reference plane, and everything looks good. Okay, so let's go back and let's change this. I like to work with the preset kind of dimensions. So whatever you started off with, whichever numbers you use, let's stick with that. Okay, let's hit apply, because the reference planes are going to change, but you'll notice that the dimensions don't change in their location. So that can cause some problems down the line. Not problems, just annoying. So in other words, if I change the length, just say, I don't know, 14 feet really quickly. You see now my geometry, if I was to build this, my geometry is set. It's going to overlap my dimensions here. So let's just work with these preset numbers that we've already started off with. Okay. So I have this. The last thing, got to set one reference plane, and that's going to be the height. So let's go to create. Let's go to reference plane. And we're going to go ahead and create another reference plane. And this one, we'll go ahead and create a dimension. Now, I want to make sure that I get that pop-up that says reference level reference. We want to make sure that we get reference level, that we're dimensioning to the actual reference level line. So in other words, if we enter this, if we drop this in on our second floor, and we say, you know what, the table needs to be 3 feet above your reference line. If we select anything else, then it can be 3 feet above the window, right? Or 3 feet above something else, which is not what we want. We want the tabletop to be 3 feet above our reference level. So I'll go ahead and click. I'm going to go ahead and select this line. Let's go ahead and just set this up to 3 feet. I'll click on the dimension and create this as a parameter, and let's call this table height, if I can spell height correctly. And I'm going to hit OK. Now quickly we could check this. Let's make sure table height, let's change this to 2 feet. Let's see. Yep, it moved. Okay, so that's what we want. I'm going to go ahead and change this back to 3 feet. Apply and OK, and we're done. We're done with our reference planes. Now we have to build the geometry. To create the geometry, we're going to go into Create, into our Forms tool. Now, 9 times out of 10, you're probably just going to be using the extrusion tool, okay? But there are additional tools that on your free time, I highly recommend that you kind of play around with so that you see what it does and how you can use it to create different forms. But I'm going to click on extrusion. Now I can go line by line. You'll notice that this now begins to feel a little bit more familiar. This kind of feels like sketch mode. I'm going to use my draw tool. I'm going to draw the form. Okay. It's just like sketch mode. We're working with boundary lines, and if the same logic, the same rules apply. No intersecting lines, no overlapping lines, one continuous loop. Okay. So I'm going to use the rectangle tool instead of the line tool, because I think the rectangle tool is faster. And I'm going to click on one corner and move to the other side. Okay. Now, this is really important. Once we start working with geometry and creating the forms, we need to make sure that we lock our forms, our boundary lines, to these reference planes, because it's the reference planes that are doing all of the movement. So in order to do that, right now that I have it created, I'm going to click on the lock pad. Now go ahead and click on this lock pad. Now, this is the one and only time where you're going to have all 4 of them pop up. So now is the time to go ahead and lock them. If for whatever reason you make a mistake and you hit the escape key, okay, when I go back, or if you just lose the lock pads, if you go back and you click on the line, you'll notice that it doesn't pop up, right? Those lock pads don't pop up. So the way to fix that is 2 ways. We could use the align tool. It's probably the fastest way. We'll use the align tool, and essentially we're going to say, let's align this boundary line to the reference line. Even though they're already aligned, we're saying, let's just make sure. So I'll click on the boundary line first, then the reference line, or the boundary line, sorry. Sorry, let me say that again. We click on the reference line first, then the boundary line. When we do that, we get the lock pad, right? The other way, so this get key twice to get out of the align command, is I can just click and grab this and then bring this back. And I want to make sure I grab, you'll see that the points are locked, but the actual line is not. So that's what I want to lock. So everything should be locked. Now at this point, we can adjust the extrusion height and the settings over here, but I have everything preset. I'm going to want everything preset to my reference points. So I'm going to hit the check mark, and you'll notice that I now have my geometry. I have some form, okay, but it's on the rail. So I'll use the align tool, and I will click on the reference plane. Then I'll click on the top of this form. So now the top of this form is aligned to the reference plane. I'll hit the lock pad. We have to do something similar to the bottom. So let's go ahead and create another reference plane. Go to the Create tab, and we'll just go ahead and place it right there. We'll go ahead and create a dimension. Escape. Let's click on reference plane. I'm going to set this to 1.5 inches. Now, at this point, I can click on the dimension and make that a parameter too, if I feel like I'm at some point ever going to want to make that change. So let's say in the future, you know what, I don't want a 1.5 inch, I want it to be 3/4, or maybe I want 2 inches. Oftentimes, though, when it comes to tabletops, they're pretty standard in thickness. So if you don't feel you are going to make that change ever, then there's no need to adjust the dimension. Okay, by setting the actual dimension, what we can do is click on the dimension and lock it. So now we're saying, okay, this dimension will always be 1.5 inches. The reference plane will always be 1.5 inches away from this reference plane. And we know that this reference plane is a parameter. So whatever height changes, whatever changes in the height that is made to this parameter or to this reference line, we'll just go ahead and be 1.5 inches below that. Okay, so it's important to lock this, but by not making this a parameter, it makes it permanent. I'll go ahead and click on the form, on the mask there, and let's go ahead and bring that and line it up there. I'll hit the lock pad, and we could begin to see on the right side that we have a geometry there. We could also go to our 3D view. Now I'm scrolling in and out and nothing comes up, okay? And that's because we're kind of in the middle of nowhere and in the abyss. So what we could do is double click on the wheel on your mouse, and that's going to bring everything that you have in your 3D model into frame. So now I'll go ahead and just kind of orbit. We'll notice that I'm in hidden line, so let's go ahead and change this to, or sorry, wireframe. Let's change this to shaded view. And now you can see that we have our tabletop. But let's test it, okay? We tested the parameters, I'm sorry, we tested the reference planes, but now that we have the form, does it all work? So we're gonna come over here to family types, and I'm going to change the length to, I don't know, 10 feet. Let's change the table height to 2 feet and the width to, say, 6 feet. And hit apply. Okay, and let's take a look. So this did get bigger. You'll see that the table is attached to these reference planes, and the reference planes change correctly in the dimension and the height as well, and the thickness. Okay, the thickness did not change. Now, if these are not working for you, then it means that you probably didn't lock one of the parameters correctly, or you probably didn't lock the form to the reference planes. Okay. So typically, we can see that, oh, it changed in width, but not in length. So then that means, okay, I have to go back. I can select my form, select the form, and we can edit the extrusion, and then we could go ahead and make the changes, the necessary changes that we need to make. Okay. Once it's working for you, then let's go ahead, then we can go back to our default settings. 8, 3, I think it was 4. Okay. We'll hit it, okay. All right, so we have the tabletop. So that's step 1. Now we're going to create the legs, and then we'll create the supporters underneath. So to create the legs, it's going to create a new geometry, a new form. So we're going to follow the same steps. Create the reference planes, set the dimensions, create the parameters, and then create the form. So we'll go to create reference planes. And now if we take a look, let's really quickly take a look at this table, we'll notice that the reference planes are 4 inches in. So that means that my legs are always going to be 4 inches away from the edge of the table, and that the legs themselves have a diameter of 2 inches. Okay, remember it's the diameter, not the radius. So it's a diameter of 2 inches. Let's go back to Revit. So I've created I'm in the create reference plane. I'm going to create some reference planes. And right now, I'm just eyeballing it. What I am doing though as well is notice that I'm not, the escape key so we can take a look at this. Notice that these sets of reference planes are not extending as far as the table ones. Okay. Same thing over here. This is how we can begin to organize our reference planes. Again, look how many reference planes we have at this point, and all we have is a tabletop, and we're going to create legs. Now you can imagine when we start creating something that is much more complex, that requires a lot more reference planes, you're going to begin to see a whole lot of different green lines. And so one way of organizing them is by making them the same length. And now I can see, like, okay, that's my reference plane to the table. That's the reference plane to the legs. Now there is the other thing we can do is, you'll notice that when I click on this, I could click and I could name them. Okay. And that is something I recommend doing when we start building more complicated and complex forms, but I'm not doing that at this point. So we created the reference planes. Now let's set the dimensions. So I'll go ahead and, so before I create the dimensions, I'm going to place them in the correct location. So they're 4 inches away from the edge. So we'll do clicking on the reference plane and then just editing the temporary dimension. Go. Okay. Now let's go ahead and dimension this. Now it's important here that you do not dimension to the form. Okay. Do not dimension to the geometry. You want to dimension to the reference plane. Because if for whatever reason the geometry is wrong, then then the next object is wrong. And this doesn't really become an issue until you start dimensioning to the other thing that's wrong. So maybe when I create the legs or the supports in between, I reference the actual leg, which was also referenced to the tabletop. And if the tabletop's wrong, then my leg's going to be wrong, then my supports are going to be wrong. But I just worked on my support, so I start freaking out because I don't know what's going on with my supports, right? And then then you really have to kind of start digging deep and trying to figure out where is the problem. And so you just don't dimension to the form, okay? Reference planes. I'm going to click there, set that, and lock it. Click here, click there, set it, and lock that dimension. Click here, click there on that reference plane. Oops. And lock that. And come over here, set this, and lock that. So now these leg reference planes are locked to the tabletop reference planes. Okay. So now I can go ahead and create the geometry. Create. We're not creating parameters here. You can if you wanted to. We can say, you know, we can, if we want to adjust, if we want to have that option, and say, I want these legs to, I want to be able to have the option to adjust these legs from 4 inches to 6 inches away. Okay. So it's really, you have to kind of foresee how you're going, how you plan on using these parameters. So that's why we're not going to create the parameters. We're going to skip that step and we're going to jump into creating the geometry. So I'll hit create. I'm going to click on extrusion. And this time I'll create the circle. I'm going to go ahead and click. Now remember that it's a 2-inch diameter, not a radius. And when we place this, as we're placing this, it's giving me the dimension for a radius. So if it's a 2-inch diameter, that means it should be a 1-inch radius. And there we have that. Now by default, whenever we create circles, it actually locks itself to, or it's actually placed because we referenced the intersection there. It always references the intersection. So if we were to actually flex this, it does actually move with it. However, I like to play it safe. Revit sometimes is known for its bugs. So the way we're going to do that is click on the circle. You'll notice that I never got the option to create that lock pad. Okay. So instead what I'm going to do is I clicked on the circle. In the properties box, we have this option to create or to show the center marks. So I'll click there. And now you'll see that I have the center lines, like these center marks. With those center marks, I could use the align tool and definitely make sure that it is locked to these reference planes. Okay. Now, we could do one or two things. We could go ahead and hit the check mark and say that's done. And then go on to the next step and create that circle, hit the check mark and make that extrusion and so on and so on. Or we can make them all at the same time, okay? The reason why you would make them individually is if you ever wanted to edit them individually, right? If I wanted this one to be different than that one in height or in width or whatever size, okay? But if they're all going to be the same, then it is better to build them all together in at the same time and then hit the check mark and extrude them all together at the same time. Because if we have to make any changes to one of them, it'll make the change to all of them. So let's go ahead and create another circle. Come out to 1 inch. Hit the escape key twice, click on the circle, make sure center mark is visible, and then we'll use the align tool, click on the reference plane first, then the actual center mark, and hit the lock pad. Do the same thing over here, and hit the lock pad. Now, I could also use the copy tool. I could click on this boundary line, hit CC for copy, that's the shortcut for copy, and I will click on the center mark there of that circle and place it right there, and also place it right there. Now we still have to lock them by copying them. It didn't save the locking parameters. So we'll use the align tool, hit the reference plane, and then hit center mark, lock, reference plane, center line, lock, reference plane, center line, and lock, and reference plane, center line, and lock. Okay. Escape key twice to get out of the align tool. And now we have our circles that are locked to these reference planes. And now we're going to go ahead and hit the check mark. And there we have our extrusions. Now, again, we could adjust the height over here, but instead what I want to do is I want to make sure that these lock to the bottom of my table, okay? Because I want, what good is moving the table down to 2 feet or up to 6 feet, but the legs are still missing, okay? So let's go into the front view. I'll hit the align tool. I'm going to select not the bottom of the form, but the reference plane that is locked. Remember, this reference plane is locked to this reference plane. And this is the one that has that flexible parameter. So I'm going to hit the align tool. To escape. Let me zoom in, make sure I clicked on the correct reference plane. Click there on, sorry, I'll use the align tool, click on the bottom reference plane, and then I will click on the top of this form, and they all moved up because they were all created at the same time. Now I'll go ahead and make sure to hit that lock pad. Let's hit the escape key twice to get it out of the align tool. And there we have our table. But now we have to test it. We have to flex it. So let's go ahead and click here and cross our fingers. Let's change this length to 10 feet. Let's change the table height to 2 feet. And let's change the width to 6 feet. I'll hit apply. Okay, and let's take a look. Everything seems to be working. My reference planes are still 4 inches away. My legs adjusted in height. And I can see over here on the right side that my legs also moved correctly. So that all seems to be working. Again, if it's not working, then you have to kind of backtrack and figure out where it went wrong. I always recommend spend a few minutes trying to figure out what went wrong. If you still can't figure it out, delete it and start over. You're going to save yourself a whole lot of time. Redoing it and doing it correctly than trying to adjust and edit something you don't really know why it's behaving in the way that it is. So let's go back. Let's set it back to its original state. So 8, table height was 3, and the width was 4. We'll go ahead and hit apply and OK. And now the last thing that we're going to work on is the actual supports. These right there. Okay. And the way we're going to do that is by creating that reference plane for the support height. And the support height, we are going to want to make a parameter, because maybe we do want that option to adjust the height of the support. Okay. So let's go back to Revit. Okay. All right. I'm going to create a reference plane. Oops. Do we want to save the project? Yes, let's save it. I'm going to go back to create and reference plane. Just create one right around there. Let's click on this and set this to 9 inches. We'll use the dimension tool over here. And again, we want to make sure that we are referencing the reference line. So I'm going to wait a second, and it says reference level. There. And I can go ahead and lock it. Let's go ahead and select the dimension and create a parameter for that. Call this support. And we'll leave it as type. Hit OK. Let's go ahead and just flex it really quickly. Let's change the support to 1 foot. Hit apply, and it moved. Perfect. That's what we want. Let's change this back to 9 inches. Apply. Okay. So the supports look pretty much the same as the legs, right? Except they were horizontal. So I'm going to go to the create, and I'm going to use that circle tool. Come over here, come to the point where they intersect, and let's go with a 1/2 inch. I'm not sure if did I specify? Hold on. Oh, it's the same thickness as the legs. Okay, so it's the same thickness as the legs. So we're just going to make sure that they come right out. So they're also 1 inch. Hit the escape key, and we're going to do the same thing. Center mark, use the align. Want to click on the reference plane there and lock it. Reference plane there and lock that. Okay. Now you'll notice something maybe a bit odd is that whenever I draw something in the front view, it's referencing the front reference plane, right? When I'm on the right side view, it's going to reference this kind of right side reference plane. And so it seems a bit odd because it's kind of placed in the middle there, but we'll go ahead and adjust that or fix that when we start locking the actual support. So I'm going to take this, let's go ahead and copy this CC on the keyboard, and then grab it at the center and place it right there, okay? We'll use the align tool again. There, click on the reference plane, click on the center mark, and there you go. So at this point, we're good to go. I think I'm doing this wrong. I am doing this wrong. I'll show you why. Let's go ahead and hit the, you probably already know why. Let's hit the check mark. And my legs are going from, sorry, my supports are going from this side of the leg to that side of the leg. Let's take a quick look at the sketch, and they should be going over here from that side to that side. So let's go back. You see, even the teacher makes mistakes. That's because I created it in the front view. Right? So that's because I created it looking in that direction when it should have been created in that direction in my right side view. So let's go ahead and select this, and I'm just going to delete it. And quickly create that same extrusion. I'll go a little bit faster this time. Select this, we'll hit the center mark, align there, and click there, lock it, there, and lock it. Grab this, copy, CC, grab it from the center point there, and place it right here at that intersection point. AL for align, and place it there. Click, click, and there you go. Okay, now I'm done. I'll hit the check mark. That's how it should look. Okay. Now what I want to do in the front view is I want to lock it to these reference planes, right? And these reference planes, because they were planes, are the same reference plane. If I click here, you'll see they're the reference planes to my legs. So I'll use the align tool. I'm going to align it to the center there and move that and hit the check mark. And you'll notice that they both moved because they were both created at the same time. I'll do the same thing over here. I'll hit this to that, and I'll hit the check mark. Sorry, I'll hit the lock pad, and this will lock it into place. And that's it. Let's go ahead and flex this. We'll do this one last time, and this time, since it's the last one, let's change the numbers around. Let's go maybe 6. Say we want to do something smaller. So 6 inches, table height, let's go 30 inches, and the width to 3 feet. Let's hit apply, hit OK. Let's take a look and make sure everything adjusted correctly. The form, the tabletop moved correctly. The legs are still 4 inches apart. The height came down. The legs are not extruding past the height. My support also adjusted and is also 6 inches away from the ground. So it seems like, and the legs or the supports are still attached to the legs. So it seems like everything is placed correctly. At this point, we can go ahead and save the file, and we're done. So we could go ahead and open up a project. Let me go file, open, and I'm not quite sure where that other file is. Let me go ahead and open. Let me just open up a new file. So we'll go to new, it's just residential, open, and hit OK. Now let's double click. Oh, now we're in here. So now I can go ahead and pull this out actually. There we go. Now, typically you wouldn't have the actual family in the background. You would just be working on the actual on your actual file. Now, what I like to do is um, sorry about that. It wants to lock up there. So what I'm going to do is go to component, load family, and now we go locate it. So it was on my desktop and it's table. Now I don't hit open. You can hit open, but at this point right now, I don't hit open. I hit Control C to copy it. So I have it, I select it, I copy it, and then I hit cancel. Because the reality is that our workflow, when we're adding families, I don't want to have to be navigating back to my desktop when it's my personal family that I created versus the default load family location. So I'm going to go back into load family, and it's going to take me back to my folder with all of these other families. And then I'll go ahead and figure out where am I going to want to go? Where am I going to want to place this this family that I just created? So probably in the furniture tab. And I could put it in tables. I could put it here. Let's go into tables. Say, and then what I'll do is I'll hit Control V. That's in Victor. And that's going to paste the table that I had copied. So now, let's say in a month from now, I'm trying to think, where did I create that table? Where is that one table that I created a month ago? I already know exactly how to navigate this section, so it's right there. So I'm going to hit open, and there's my table. Let's go ahead and create another one. Place this one over here. Notice the location, right? You see where my cursor is grabbing the table? It's at the center mark. It's where those two default reference planes were located. That's where my table is being created. So if you wanted your table to come in, let's say at the corner, then everything we did has to be adjusted. So all of the reference planes have to be adjusted in accordance to those two reference planes, those center reference planes that are default. I'm gonna hit the escape key. Let's go to the 3D view. Oh, it's coming out over here. Let's place it right. Let's change this to shaded so we can take a closer look at it. Okay, so I'm going to go ahead and click on one. Now, remember at the very beginning, I had said make a mental note of type versus instance when we're creating the parameters. So let's say I want to make a change here. And if I come over here to the left-hand side, we have length. And the length was the one that was an instance. The width was the one that was a type. So notice that if I want to make a change to the instance parameter, which was the length, all I have to do is select the object, and in the properties tab, it's right here. So we could change this to, say, 10 feet and apply. And that changed correctly. But nothing happened to this one. Now let's go ahead and click on the same one. Let's go to edit type. And here you'll see the other parameters that I created. There's my support, my table height, and my width. Let's change the width because all these were all type parameters when we created them. Let's change the width to 6 feet and let's hit apply. Notice that they both changed because when we're creating the type parameters, what we're saying is make this change to all of my families, all of my table families that I created. And when it's an instance parameter, like the length, it's saying make that change just to this one to this one family that I created. So type parameters adjusts and affects all of my families. The instance parameter affects just the one that I have selected. So you can imagine there's pros and cons to this depending on what it is you're creating. Sometimes you want to be able to adjust everything to be the same length or width or height, or sometimes you want that flexibility to customize each and every one of them, which can also be a problem if you have multiple tables, like let's say a restaurant, and you have to go in and you have to adjust the height of 30 tables. It would have been a lot better if that parameter was a type parameter where you make that change just once. So those are the difference. That's the difference between the instance and the type parameters. Okay? But here we could also see you could change all sorts of things. At this point, we change it to 1 foot. Let's change this to 4 feet. Apply. And because we built everything correctly with the reference planes, it adjusts correctly. Okay. So that's it for this tutorial on families. I'll follow up with a second tutorial and create a little bit more of a complex family. It's going to be the same exact properties, the same exact process, but there's going to be a whole lot more reference planes. Okay, good luck, everyone.